In a world full of magic, dangers, and mysteries, Guts, the swordsman, has a night of passion with a beautiful young girl. Suddenly, the girl transforms into a horrible monster and proudly tells Guts that she finally has him and will send him to hell. Our hero doesn't seem surprised or impressed as he quickly plunges his metallic arm into the monster's mouth and kills it with a single shot. With his plans cancelled, our hero decides it's time to continue his journey and heads towards the nearest village. While walking through the streets of the city, Guts notices some carts filled with prisoners, mostly young girls, but he continues on his way. In the village's bar, a group of drunken criminals mistreats a little elf prisoner by throwing knives at him. The townspeople are not happy with what's happening since no one, not even the mayor, dares to lift a finger against the men from Koka Castle, who spend their time getting drunk and mistreating others. Guts enters the tavern and observes the situation, so he hands some belongings to the bartender to keep them safe and warns him that soon some things will be broken. The men from Koka Castle continue attacking the elf when suddenly, without warning, an arrow pierces their leader's head, impaling him against the wall. The rest of the men don't have time to react as a rain of arrows, courtesy of Guts' crossbow arm, takes them out, except for one who gets injured in the nose. Guts asks the man if he is one of the thieves from Koka Castle, and the man confirms it, so our protagonist tells him to send a message to his boss. The Black Swordsman has arrived. A soldier tries to attack Guts for treason, but he unsheathes a gigantic sword and cleaves him in two. Everyone is astonished, especially by the size of such a weapon, too large and heavy to be called a sword. Guts leaves without listening to the elf who asks for his help to be freed. On the street, the elf, now liberated, scolds Guts for leaving him in the bar and introduces himself as Puck, an elf who was traveling with a group of artists until they were attacked by the men from Koka Castle. Puck updates Guts, saying that the thieves have an agreement with the mayor. As long as the security forces don't do anything to them, they won't destroy the village. But now that agreement has ended, and they are likely coming after him. Guts punches the elf and orders him to stay away because if he touches him again, he'll kill him. Puck obeys, mainly because the castle guards have him surrounded, and there's nowhere to escape. Later, in the castle dungeon, Guts is savagely beaten, but to the surprise of his jailer, he withstands a great deal of punishment. Suddenly, the mayor of the village arrives and scolds Guts for killing the men, as now the entire army of Koka Castle is heading towards the city, and nothing will be left, considering their terrifying leader is coming with them. Guts tells him that he knows exactly who he's up against and also knows the kind of deal the mayor made with the group's leader since he noticed that the women and children in the carriage he crossed on his way in are nothing but sacrifices. The mayor responds that he has no other choice, and it's his responsibility. Then, the mayor leaves, heading to Koka Castle to beg for mercy. In the castle, the man Guts spared informs his leader that they were attacked, and when he mentions the sword, the leader believes he may know who he's referring to. The mayor arrives and apologizes, but the group's leader tells him that it doesn't matter what he says, he will go and annihilate the people of the village, not out of revenge or for money, but simply because he wants to. In the dungeon, a weakened Guts awaits death and hallucinates a strange fetus-like creature when Puck appears and uses his powers to heal his wounds and hands him the keys. The bandits arrive and rampage through everything in their path, but a recovered Guts stands up to them and takes down the majority. The leader of the thieves recognizes Guts as the one who, for some reason, is hunting those called apostles. Guts fires his crossbow at the warrior, and when everyone thinks he has killed him, the warrior transforms into a huge snake-like monster, assuring Guts that there is no human capable of stopping him. The monster attacks Guts and is surprised by our hero's ability to withstand his punishment, but other than that, Guts can do nothing and is at the mercy of the creature. However, it seems that was the plan all along, as the crossbow arm turns into a cannon and blasts the monster, causing it great damage. With the monster wounded, Guts takes his sword and finishes the job, defeating it. Despite that, the monster is not dead, which was part of Guts' plan. He prepares to inflict a great deal of pain unless the monster reveals the whereabouts of the 5 members of the God Hand. The monster, having recognized the mark on our hero's neck, fearfully replies that neither he nor any of the apostles have that information, so Guts throws him into the fire and leaves as the creature dies burning. Shocked by what he has witnessed, Puck watches as our hero walks away without looking back. At night, Guts ventures into a dark forest while hearing malicious voices seemingly coming from the trees. He unsheathes his sword, prepared to face any threat that comes his way. As the spirits swoop down on him, Guts fights valiantly, defending himself against their attacks. However, the battle is tough and exhausting. At dawn, Puck arrives in the forest riding on the back of a bird. He searches for Guts but fails to find him anywhere. Puck begins to accept that the Black Swordsman is gone when the branch he's perched on breaks, and he falls to the ground. By chance, he lands near Guts, who is so injured that he can barely stand. Puck examines Guts' wounds and reveals that he has been following him out of curiosity about his monster hunting lifestyle. However, Guts abruptly pushes Puck away, refusing to have the elf as a companion due to his size and apparent weakness. After rejecting Puck's company, Guts continues on his path, leaving the elf alone in the forest. Later, Guts finds a road and continues his march in the rain, protected by a hood. At that moment, a priest driving a covered cart approaches him and offers him a ride. Guts rejects the offer twice, warning the priest about the spirits that are pursuing him. However, the priest assures him that no spirit can harm him thanks to divine protection. Convinced that the man's fate is not his concern, Guts finally accepts to get on the cart. Inside the cart, Guts encounters Puck again, who has already accepted the priest's offer for a ride. He also meets the priest's daughter, Colette, who offers him wine. Guts mentions that his wounds were caused by the spirits, and Colette's father assumes he is a mercenary due to his weaponry. Although Guts doesn't contradict him, the priest shares the story of his nephew, who became a mercenary and died 5 years ago. Guts reflects that even though the nephew may have died happily, he is still dead and cannot be brought back. He then accepts a blanket from Colette and decides to rest. During his sleep, Guts has a terrifying nightmare. He finds himself naked and trapped in a narrow, roofless corridor, with a gigantic eye watching him from above. A monstrous creature chases him, and his brand of sacrifice starts bleeding as he hears the malicious voices of the spirits. Guts wakes up just before the creature catches up to him. Startled awake, Guts stabs a small one-eyed creature called an incubus that is clinging to his face. The sudden noise wakes up Colette and Puck, and Guts explains that the incubus feeds on people's fear, inducing nightmares. The priest starts to believe that Guts is being pursued by spirits. Puck asks about the connection between the incubus and Guts' brand of sacrifice, but the warrior responds enigmatically. Seeing his brand bleeding, Guts jumps out of the cart and prepares to fight the approaching spirits. In the darkness of the night, the cart's horses become agitated, and Colette rushes to calm them down. Before Guts can reach her, a lance emerges from the ground, impaling the girl's stomach and killing her. Guts confronts the skeletons rising from the ground, possessed by the spirits. He orders the priest and Puck to flee while he succumbs to anger and massacres the skeletons with his powerful sword. However, the priest stays behind, and his screams draw the attention of Guts and Puck. Colette's body is possessed by a spirit, and with an ancient sword, she beheads her own father. Guts, in shock, watches helplessly as the girl approaches him and impales her sword into his stomach. In an act of survival, Guts delivers a strike with his one-armed sword, sending the girl's torso flying. He continues his fierce battle against the skeletons until dawn, at which point his injuries are so severe that he starts spitting blood. As the spirits dissipate and the skeletons fall behind, Puck flies to Guts to assure him that Colette and her father's deaths are not his fault. Guts, in the midst of his pain, begins to laugh and affirms that those deaths are proof of his philosophy. Those who are weak and get involved in others' affairs cannot survive. The malicious voices of the spirits taunt Guts, who struggles to make them stop. Frustrated, he fires his arm cannon at the trees, silencing the voices. Guts walks away, closely followed by Puck. In a distant city, a man named Dahl carries out a public execution of a woman accused of witchcraft. Dahl returns to the side of his superior, the Count, seated on a throne next to the gallows. Privately, Dahl questions if they are carrying out too many executions, but the Count justifies their actions, claiming to execute heretics for the benefit of the rest of their subjects. In the midst of the crowd, Guts witnesses the execution and picks up the decapitated head of the woman. A nearby guard approaches after provoking a boy, the executed woman's brother, and demands that Guts hand over the head. In a defiant act, Guts spits in the guard's face, surprising both the guard and the peasants present. He then throws the head to the Count, who catches it with one hand. The guard attempts to attack Guts but receives a deadly blow from a metallic fist. The Count, observing the woman's head, is terrified to see that a brand of sacrifice has been drawn on her forehead with blood. The Count's attention turns to Guts, who uses the blood dripping from his own brand of sacrifice to draw a straight line on his throat before walking away. The Count realizes that this action is a declaration of war, just before crushing the woman's head with his bare hands. Guts is forced to flee the city as he is pursued by several guards. However, he easily defeats them by using his massive sword to cleave them in half and penetrate their armor. Two crossbowmen on a nearby gallows aim their weapons at Guts, but Puck intervenes and blinds them with a burst of light. Guts destroys the gallows legs, causing the crossbowmen to fall to their deaths. At that moment, Zander, the captain of the guards, a burly man armed with a giant hammer, appears. Although Zander tries to attack Guts, the latter easily evades him, and the captain ends up accidentally killing several of his own soldiers. Despite this, Zander persists in his attack. He finally manages to corner Guts between him and a brick wall, preparing for the final blow with his hammer. However, Guts intervenes with a powerful strike from his giant sword that destroys Zandark's weapon, causing it to shatter and send shards into the captain's face, who falls to the ground in agony and receives a kick from Guts to the face. Despite his momentary victory, Guts realizes that the endless stream of soldiers approaching him is cornering him with no escape route. At that moment, two smoke bombs are thrown and explode between Guts and the soldiers. Hidden from their view, a small, bandaged, hooded man guides Guts toward a narrow barred passage. Guts follows the mysterious man, and as the smoke dissipates, the soldiers find themselves perplexed, not knowing where he has gone. The bandaged man leads Guts to his hidden laboratory, filled with strange oddities such as skeletons of unknown animals and jars containing intestines and dead elves, which horrify Puck. The man reveals that these oddities come from his former profession as a physician. Guts demands to know who this man is, but instead of answering, the man mentions that he witnessed Guts' actions during the execution and suspects that Guts seeks personal revenge against the Count. Enraged, Guts kicks the man's cane, causing him to fall to the ground. However, Guts' apparent cruelty turns to fear when Puck and the bandaged man notice that the latter has half of his face disfigured and prosthetic legs. The mutilated man pleads with Guts to kill the Count, claiming that he is a demon. He then leads them to a secret room where they find an object shaped like an egg with scattered human facial features on its surface. Guts realizes that it is a Beherit, a mysterious object with unknown power. Guts lifts the bandaged man by the collar and demands to know how he came to possess the Beherit. The man claims to have stolen it from the Count. Guts releases him, and the bandaged man explains. His name is Vargas. 7 years ago, when the Count was still human, Vargas worked as a physician in the castle. There came a day when the Count ordered inquisitions and executions, taking prisoners to the castle dungeons where they were tortured and eaten. Disgusted by this behavior, Vargas and his family escaped the city but were captured. As punishment, Vargas had half of his face disfigured, his legs amputated, and was forced to witness his family being devoured. Before Vargas could be consumed, he managed to fake his own death and escape from the dungeons, taking the Beherit with him. Vargas is unaware of the true purpose of the Beherit. Guts explains that it is used to open a portal between the human world and another dimension where the God Hand, a group of 5 demons, resides. Both Puck and Vargas are shocked by this revelation. Inside the castle, Zondark's wounds are being attended to, but he can't stay calm due to an obsessive desire to kill the Black Swordsman. The Count appears and orders everyone to leave the room except Zondark. The Count grabs him by the neck as the deranged soldier repeatedly smashes his own head against a stone column, begging the Count to allow him to kill Guts. The Count grants his wish and forces Zondark to look at him directly. The Count opens his mouth, and a slug-like creature crawls out of his throat and enters Zondark. Outside the castle, Dahl is informed by a soldier that an informant knows the whereabouts of the Black Swordsman. The Count exits the castle and declares that Zondark, now featureless in the face, will be the one to kill him. Zondark starts laughing at the prospect of killing Guts. In Vargas' laboratory, Puck examines the Beherit while Guts observes. The elf is astonished to discover that the Beherit is alive. One of its eyes opens and briefly looks at him. Guts says that although it's alive, the Beherit poses no danger, and he also doesn't know how to use it to reach the God Hand. Guts then asks Vargas how the Count came to possess the Beherit. Vargas replies that it happened by chance. A caravan of merchants passed through the city, unaware of the Beherit's purpose or value, and sold it to the Count. Vargas finds and opens a map with the castle's blueprints, pointing out an escape route that Guts could use to infiltrate. He approaches Guts and pleads with him to kill the Count, but when he puts his hand on Guts' shoulder, Guts reacts violently, pushing Vargas away and ordering him never to touch him. The tense moment is relieved by Puck, and Guts declares that he will kill the Count, but not for Vargas' sake. Suddenly, the door to Vargas' laboratory is destroyed, and Zondark appears. Guts unsheathes his sword and confronts the wounded man, but the renewed strength in Zondark's blows indicates to Guts that he is no longer human. Zondark lunges, but Guts dodges and cuts off his right arm. After a brief moment, Zondark starts growing tentacles from his new stump to replace it. Using his tentacles to wield his hammer, Zondark engages Guts in combat once again, but the speed has increased significantly. Zondark's arm moves like a whip, and the hammer cuts through the supports around Vargas' laboratory. The ceiling begins to collapse, and Puck is saved from falling debris by Vargas. They then watch the ongoing battle, marveling at how Guts is keeping up and blocking each of Zondark's whip-like strikes. Guts starts using his cape to disorient Zondark. He takes advantage of Zondark's confusion to quickly strike his head, cutting it from the left temple to the skull. However, Zondark doesn't fall. Instead, the slug-like creature emerges from this new wound and praises the Black Swordsman's skills. Vargas realizes that the slug is actually the Count. The Count notices the Beherit on the floor, although Vargas quickly picks it up, and he promises to torture Vargas as he did 7 years ago. The Count then turns his attention to Guts, but before they can resume their battle, the ceiling collapses, and Zondark's body is crushed. Guts, Vargas, and Puck escape through a hidden passage beneath a floor tile as the laboratory is engulfed in flames. The three emerge from a hidden sewer grate beneath a bridge, and Guts explains that even though the Count has been using Zondark's body, which burned in the fire, the Count himself is not dead because Zondark was only possessed by a fraction of the Count's power. As they prepare to part ways, Guts demands the Beherit from Vargas and snatches it from him when Vargas hesitates to hand it over. He then walks away with Puck, leaving Vargas alone under the bridge but not without a final farewell from the elf. Now alone, Vargas is attacked by a tentacle emerging from the sewer. Later, Puck scolds Guts for stealing the Beherit. Given that both Guts and Vargas oppose the Count, the elf says they could have been allies. Guts laughs at the idea, stating that aligning himself with Vargas would have meant his own demise. The two turn a corner and overhear several people talking about an upcoming execution. According to the conversation, the person scheduled for execution has some connection to the Black Swordsman, and the execution is meant to serve as a warning. Upon hearing this, Guts walks away. Settling in a dilapidated house to inspect his equipment, Guts ignores Puck's attempts to talk to him. Frustrated, Puck flies away. As Guts cleans his gear, he looks at the remaining stump of his left arm and touches his closed right eye. As he does so, he recalls Vargas' story of how he was disfigured by the Count and his plea to Guts to kill the Count for him. Guts punches the wall in frustration. Vargas is executed in front of a disappointed Count who expected our hero to show up. The Count's soldiers dispose of Vargas' head, but before throwing it into a common pit, Guts retrieves it, and the two head back to confront their enemy. Later, the Count advances through the castle with Puck in a cage. They visit Theresia's room, the Count's daughter, to present Puck as a gift. Theresia is locked in her room out of fear of the heretics. During the visit, she feels uneasy with the Count, and he leaves feeling dejected. Meanwhile, Guts ascends the castle stairs in search of the Count and encounters Zander, who has undergone a monstrous transformation. Guts easily wins the duel but is caught off guard by Zander's still-living whip arm. Zander reveals that the only way to defeat him is by cutting off his head, and Guts does so swiftly. Guts continues on his path, determined to kill the real Count despite his significant blood loss. Puck and Theresia have a conversation in which she reveals that her mother was killed 7 years ago by pagan worshippers. Theresia doesn't remember these events but feels that the Count has lost his humanity. She is unaware of his condition as an apostle. Meanwhile, Guts reaches the Count's throne room and confronts Dahl and his guards. Puck overhears the guards talking about an intruder in the castle, who turns out to be Guts. Puck asks Theresia to open the window, and although she initially refuses, she eventually gives in and lets Puck go. Puck promises to return and free her from her prison. Guts comes face to face with the Count, who transforms into a slug-like creature due to Guts' strength in their previous battles. Although Guts attempts to cut the Count, his limbs regenerate. Guts and the Count engage in a violent battle that shakes the castle. During the battle, a wall breaks, leading to the outside of the castle where Puck reunites with Guts. Theresia decides to leave her room and confront her liberation. The Count loses sight of Guts and attacks someone hiding behind a column, revealing it to be Dahl disguised. Guts takes advantage of this distraction to attack the Count but is brutally beaten. The Count grabs Guts' leg and throws him against the columns, leaving him seemingly defeated. While Guts lies defeated on a destroyed pillar, the Count taunts him for having a fragile human body. Puck intervenes in defense of Guts and accuses the Count of being a fragile human hiding behind his monstrous appearance. However, their conversation is interrupted when the Beherit falls from Guts' pocket. Puck quickly grabs the Beherit and tries to keep it away from the Count, but his pursuit is abruptly halted by the appearance of Theresia, who has found her way to the throne room. Terrified by her own father's apostle form, Theresia takes refuge behind one of the remaining columns. Enraged, the Count turns his attention to Puck to unleash his wrath, but at that very moment, Guts throws knives that stop the Count and protect Puck. Despite having his body torn apart, Guts displays an unwavering determination as he confronts the Count once again. However, he is easily repelled by the Count's attack, who directs his blow towards the pillar where Theresia is hiding. But just as the Count prepares to deliver the final blow, Guts grabs Theresia and uses her as a shield against her own father. The Count hesitates to attack, giving Guts the opportunity to shoot his cannon arm directly at the Count's face. Wielding his massive sword with his mouth and prosthetic hand, Guts decapitates the Count. Guts advances towards the still-living Count and stabs him in the face to show him the true strength of humans. Puck realizes Theresia's distress and tries to confront Guts, as his actions are the cause of the girl's suffering. However, Guts turns against Puck and threatens to kill him if he doesn't step aside. Guts orders Theresia to watch as he stabs the Count's face, explaining that it is the consequence of having an undying body, the body of an apostle. Guts continues his fierce assault until the blade of his dagger breaks and slips in the Count's blood. At that moment, Guts sits down and starts laughing in front of Puck and Theresia, who are confused and horrified by the scene. Meanwhile, the Count's blood slowly seeps into the Beherit as he mutters to himself that he doesn't want to die. The Beherit rearranges its facial features until it takes on a human appearance and begins shedding tears of blood. Suddenly, Guts, Puck, Theresia, and the Count are transported to a dimension seemingly composed solely of intersecting stairs, which some of you may recognize as reminiscent of M.C. Escher's designs. This phenomenon is due to the power of the Beherit and the Count's desire to stay alive. While Guts, Theresia, and Puck look around, confused by their new surroundings, the Count announces the arrival of the God Hand. They all look up and see the God Hand observing them from the top of a staircase. Back on Earth, a tornado engulfs the castle in front of frightened villagers who don't know what is happening. In the staircase dimension, Guts recognizes one of the members of the God Hand, whom he calls Griffith. However, the demon ignores him. The Count pleads with another demon to kill Guts, but the demon in question, Void, refuses. The God Hand explains that the apostle's Guts has killed in the past are insignificant to them and not worth killing him over. Griffith insults Guts, saying that his existence is beneath his, which prompts our hero to find the strength to rise and swing his sword at the demon. The other demons marvel at Guts' indomitable will, and one of them, small and round, comments that Guts has been marked by this hawk-like demon, known to the other demons as Femto. Guts continues his unsteady ascent up the stairs, shouting that he is responsible for Femto's position among the God Hand, and he mocks the divine air emanating from the demon. While Puck speculates on the relationship between Guts and Femto, Guts suddenly writhes in pain as blood spurts from his brand. Femto explains that the amount of blood that flows from Guts' brand and the pain he feels increase in proportion to the power of the demons he faces. The presence of a humble apostle causes the brand to drip a few drops of blood, while these more powerful demons cause debilitating pain and torrents of blood, and could even result in death. Guts' eyes roll back as he falls backward but gathers the strength to raise his sword above his head and strike at Femto, greatly impressing the other 4 members of the God Hand. Before the blow can land, however, Femto sends Guts flying with a telekinetic attack and casually tells the Count that his desire to kill Guts may have inadvertently been fulfilled. Void decides he has had enough of the fight between Guts and Femto and proceeds with the Count's wish. The demons tell the Count that they cannot grant him more power in exchange for Guts' life because the Count feels no affection for him. Then, Femto points out Teresia as a viable candidate for sacrifice, and the small round demon urges the Count to do the same as he did last time. Teresia, confused, questions the claim, and the demon opens a hole in space-time, showing images of the Count 7 years ago. Despite the Count's pleas for them not to show Teresia, the demons ignore him. The images show that 7 years ago, the Count frequently went on pagan hunts to rid his land of heretics. One day, upon returning to the castle, he found his wife willingly participating in a pagan orgy. The Count became enraged and killed all the pagan worshippers, except his wife, whom he couldn't bring himself to kill. His despair activated his Beherit, and the God Hand, except for Femto, appeared before him and granted him an apostle body in exchange for his wife's life, who was devoured alive by the Count after gaining his new power. Void summons a brand of fire in front of Teresia and awaits the Count's approval before marking her as a sacrifice. Meanwhile, Guts, whose fingers were injured in the fight against the Count, asks Puck to heal them using his healing powder. In a flashback from the past, a white-haired man calls out to Guts in an abandoned battlefield, filled with corpses. He helps a young Guts free himself from under a pile of bodies. The white-haired man laments that all humans are subject to an immutable fate and questions what his place in the world is. While confessing to Guts that he is the first person he has asked these questions to, it is revealed that this man is actually Griffith, before losing his humanity and becoming Femto. In the present, the God Hand tries to persuade the Count to mark his daughter, while Guts tries to convince Puck to heal his hand. Femto diverts his attention towards an infinite void in the distance, a swirling mass of deceased souls that Femto describes as a small portion of hell. The God Hand tells the Count that he can mark Teresia, sacrificing her to continue living, or be absorbed by the souls in the whirlwind and dissolve into nothingness, as all apostles do when they die. The Count, unsure of what to do, proclaims that he doesn't want to die but sees visions of happier times with his wife and Teresia. He takes too long to decide, and the last traces of his life fade away. As a consequence, the souls in the whirlwind surge toward him and assimilate his human body into their formless mass. Puck notices Vargas among the souls dragging the Count toward them. The Count and Teresia reach out their hands before he is pulled into the void. Another tentacle-like mass finds Guts on the ground, and due to the brand attracting them on his neck, they try to drag him along with the Count. Acting quickly, Guts reloads his cannon arm for a final shot at Femto, which explodes a few meters away from the demon, who remains unharmed. The force of the cannon shot causes the souls to lose their grip on Guts, and he falls to the ground. Once the Count's purpose of summoning the God Hand is fulfilled, Guts and Femto exchange one last look before Guts, Puck, and Teresia are transported back to the destroyed castle. Puck's attempts to talk to Teresia are rejected, and she wishes to return to her room. She expresses a desire to commit suicide instead of continuing to live, an idea encouraged by Guts. The comment surprises both Teresia and Puck, with the latter slapping Guts. However, Guts continues and tells Teresia that if life is so terrible for her, she should use a nearby serrated dagger to cut her wrists. Just as she is about to do so, the ground beneath her collapses, and Guts throws his sword for her to grab, which she does, demonstrating a subconscious desire to live. Guts manages to throw Teresia onto solid ground before she falls, but before she can fully recover, Guts looks at his hand and questions his actions, seemingly unable to comprehend what he has just done. A furious Teresia sits in front of Guts and blames him for the past events, exclaiming that she will be the one to kill him. As Guts retrieves his cloak and the Beherit from the surrounding debris, he invites her to do so when she is ready. Guts limps away from the castle, and as Puck catches up to him, he notices tears in Guts' eyes, which Guts hurriedly wipes away. With a more determined expression, Guts and Puck leave the castle, leaving Teresia behind. Having concluded the adventure in the Count's castle, we are transported to the past, where a group of mercenaries, led by a man named Gambino, comes across a gruesome scene. People hang from their necks on a leafless tree. Underneath a woman's body among the corpses, a baby lies in a pool of blood and placenta, seemingly born after his mother had already passed away. The mercenaries assume the baby is dead. Shisu, Gambino's lover, who had suffered a miscarriage 3 days prior, notices the baby on the ground and lovingly cradles him. Gambino intervenes, and when the baby falls to the ground, the impact causes him to move and cry, revealing that he is alive. Shisu breaks free from Gambino's grasp and takes the baby with her to the group, an idea that is not well received by the mercenaries, who see the unfortunate circumstances of the baby's birth as a bad omen. However, Gambino decides to allow Shisu to keep the baby to provide comfort after having lost her own child previously. 3 years later, the baby, now called Guts, watches in despair as his adoptive mother, Shisu, dies from the plague. Another 3 years later, we see Guts assisting the soldiers of the mercenary group in battle, wielding Gambino's weapons. Unable to sleep, Guts clings to his sword for comfort. Soon, Gambino gives Guts his first harsh lesson by striking his face with a spear's shaft for not changing his weapons quickly enough. Gambino begins training Guts in swordsmanship, but since the mercenary band lacks children's weapons, Guts is forced to use a full-sized sword for practice. Despite suffering some cuts from Gambino and struggling to handle the heavy weapon, Guts manages to graze Gambino's cheek, prompting the latter to angrily swing his sword across Guts' face, leaving a deep wound on his nose. Later that night, as Guts recovers from his injuries, he cradles his sword for comfort as he falls asleep. The next day, Gambino, whom Guts suspects of trying to soothe his guilty conscience, hands him ointment to help heal his wounds. Again, 3 years pass, and a 9-year-old Guts is placed on the front line alongside Gambino during an assault on a castle. Despite struggling against a much larger opponent, Guts achieves his first kill in battle. He is saved by Gambino when another soldier attacks him from behind. Later that day, after the successful assault, Guts hands Gambino the money earned in the operation, and Gambino tosses him a coin as a reward for a job well done. As Guts walks away, Gambino is approached by another mercenary from the group, Donovan, who makes a request of Gambino. During the night, Guts has trouble sleeping. He sees a shadow outside his tent, and it is revealed that the cause of the shadow is Donovan, who enters uninvited. Sensing danger, Guts reaches for his sword, but Donovan manages to overpower him. Guts is left defenseless, unable to reach his weapon. Guts manages to keep Donovan at bay for a brief period of time, but the larger and older soldier quickly takes advantage. Guts' spirit is broken when he discovers that Donovan paid Gambino to commit a violent act against him, something Donovan carries out. The next morning, Guts emerges from his shelter to confront Gambino, but casual conversations and Gambino's apparent lack of knowledge about what transpired between Guts and Donovan convince Guts of his innocence. Frustrated, Guts kicks over a water barrel, unable to directly ask Gambino if he truly sold him to Donovan. Some time passes, and Gambino leads the mercenaries in a battle in the forest. Guts watches Donovan chasing and killing stragglers from the enemy side. After disposing of them, Guts shoots a crossbow bolt that hits Donovan in the back. Guts fires another bolt directly into Donovan's mouth and then thrusts his sword through his throat. Guts demands to know who truly betrayed him, but Donovan dies before he can answer. Guts returns to the fight but is knocked down by the shockwave of an explosion. He sees Gambino lying on the ground with a severed leg. The battle ends in favor of the mercenaries, and Gambino receives medical attention from the group, although there are doubts about his ability to fight again. Some mercenaries begin considering new leaders for the group. Guts stays by Gambino's side, who has dreams and calls out for Shisu. 2 years pass, and Guts has reached a point where he can battle people much larger and older than him. After killing an enemy general in a fight, Guts encounters Gambino, who now has a dog as his companion, on a hill to tell him about the reward he has obtained. Gambino's reaction is to order Guts to bring food for the dog. After Guts leaves, Gambino kicks the dog upon sensing its disapproval of the words directed at Guts. Furious, Guts enters his shelter and destroys its structure, feeling saddened by Gambino's failure to recognize him. Later, during the night, a drunken Gambino enters Guts' shelter and tries to kill him. He blames Guts for Shisu's death and the loss of his leg, and finally admits that he was the one Donovan paid to commit violent acts against Guts. Devastated by these revelations and with no choice but to defend himself from his adoptive father's rage, Guts thrusts his sword through Gambino's neck just as the latter is about to kill him. Gambino calls out for Shisu before succumbing to his wounds. His body falls and crashes into a table with a lit candle, causing the tent to catch fire and alerting the rest of the mercenary group to what has happened. Convinced that Guts cold-bloodedly murdered their leader, they curse him for betraying his adoptive father and bringing bad luck to the group. The warriors force the young boy to flee the camp on horseback, armed with his sword. However, some mercenaries pursue Guts, and one of them manages to wound him in the back with a crossbow bolt, believing he is dead when he falls from the cliff into shallow water. Shortly after, Guts awakens and looks up at the night sky, lost without knowing where to go or what to do. He stands up and realizes that a pack of wolves surrounds him, ready to attack. But Guts' body instinctively moves to defend against the wolves. He manages to drive them away before collapsing and then encounters another wandering group of mercenaries in need of one more soldier in their ranks. 4 years have passed since that night, and a group of mercenaries is preparing to assault a heavily fortified castle. They manage to infiltrate, but their progress is halted by the imposing figure of a man recognized as Bezuso. The mercenaries' employer seeks volunteers to face Bezuso, but no one steps forward due to fear of the knight's reputation as a killer of 30 men and his history of killing a bear. However, Guts, now 15 years old, steps forward willing to fight after requesting a reward of 7 gold pieces. Despite the initial impression Bezuso makes on Guts, the young boy proves to be more skilled than expected. Both the mercenaries and the enemy soldiers are amazed by the speed at which Guts fights and defeats Bezuso, breaking his battle axe, dealing a mortal blow to his waist, and ultimately smashing his sword into the knight's skull as he begs for mercy. After Guts kills Bezuso, the mercenaries manage to conquer the castle. Another group of mercenaries, the castle's late-arriving defenders, witness the duel between Guts and Bezuso. The group wonders among themselves if Guts is as strong as their leader, Griffith, before retreating. After the battle, Guts collects the reward for both the plunder and the defeat of Bezuso from his employers. The employer who pays him asks Guts to consider working for him full-time with the promise of becoming his squire. However, Guts refuses and ignores the man grabbing his shoulder. Guts reacts violently and orders the man never to touch him again. In a field some distance from the castle, the group of mercenaries that witnessed the duel between Guts and Bezuso has shed their armor and is comfortably relaxing on the grass. They observe Guts walking alone on a nearby path, and one man among them, Corcus, leads a group of mercenaries to kill Guts and take his earnings. However, Corcus gets into trouble when Guts notices his group and successfully defends himself by killing Dante, the first attacker, and then incapacitating the second one. Following Griffith's instructions, his second-in-command Casca is ordered to intervene and intercept Guts with an arrow in the arm just as he was about to go after Corcus. When Guts refuses to yield and surrender, Casca charges at him on horseback. The two battle until Guts brings Casca down to the ground by gravely wounding her horse. He is surprised to discover that his opponent is a woman. Although Casca is more skilled than Guts, to the spectator's surprise, he gains the upper hand by knocking her to the ground. However, before Guts delivers the killing blow, the fight is interrupted by a spear thrown by Griffith, which lands between Guts and Casca. The soldiers calm down as they ensure Guts' defeat, as Griffith asks him to drop his sword. Guts refuses and finds himself stabbed in the shoulder by Griffith's sword. Everyone applauds and is greatly impressed as Griffith manages to defeat Guts with a single strike. Guts forces himself to stand up and attack Griffith again but eventually collapses, seeing Griffith removing his helmet and looking at him with his long white hair cascading over his shoulders. Guts finds himself immersed in a nightmare where Donovan chases his 11-year-old self through a dark field of bones. Filled with anguish, Guts encounters Gambino and desperately begs for help, but Gambino firmly refuses, claiming that Guts killed him. Gambino directs his attention to his dog, whose face resembles Shisu's, and they both agree that Guts doesn't deserve to be rescued. Donovan overpowers Guts as he pleads for Gambino's forgiveness. Gambino and Shisu fade away among the bones, and Gambino sentences Guts, telling him that he should have died the day they found him as a baby. The scene shifts, and Guts, now 15 years old, finds himself naked in an infinite void, screaming for them not to touch him, while a naked Casca embraces his body. Guts wakes up in an unfamiliar tent, feeling pain in his shoulder and suddenly remembering Griffith and their confrontation. He leaves the tent and looks around. The camp is filled with young mercenaries. In the distance, Guts spots Casca engaged in a heated argument with Griffith. When the confrontation concludes, she approaches Guts, recognizing him from her dream, and greets him with a punch to the stomach. She walks away, wishing that Griffith had killed Guts. Judo, a close mercenary, explains that Casca has forsaken her femininity to become a mercenary, and Griffith had ordered her to sleep next to Guts in the preceding days to keep him warm. Griffith approaches amiably, returns Guts' sword, and asks him to accompany him on a tour of the camp, while the other mercenaries watch him defiantly. Griffith reveals that the group is called the Band of the Hawk, and Guts admits to having heard rumors about their formidable reputation. Upon reaching the top of a nearby hill, showing personal interest in Guts, Griffith confesses that he forgave him because he wants him to join the band's ranks. However, Guts refuses and instead wishes to repay the favor by thrusting his sword into Griffith's chest. In response to this declaration, Griffith asks what Guts would gain if he were to win the fight, and Guts answers that he could have it all. Griffith accepts, saying that he doesn't mind using force, and unsheathes his sword. Casca, who has been following them closely, emerges from her hiding spot as Griffith quickly orders her not to intervene. Casca turns around and relays the order to the rest of the onlookers approaching the scene. Guts is quickly overwhelmed and wonders how Griffith can defeat his massive sword with a simple rapier. The fight appears to reach its end when Griffith jumps and lands on the blade of Guts' sword, pointing his own weapon at Guts' face. Griffith praises Guts' fighting methods and his determination to win at any cost but notes that Guts' weight hinders him from handling his sword properly and offers to postpone the fight. Guts reproaches Griffith for talking too much and, in an act of defiance, uses his own mouth to bite down on the blade of Griffith's sword, determined to continue the battle. Guts uses this technique to unbalance Griffith, and they both tumble on the edge of the hill, with Guts on top as he strikes and kicks his opponent. As the spectators line up at the hilltop, they all show varying degrees of surprise at seeing someone actually knock Griffith down. However, a brief pause in the attacks gives Griffith the opportunity to recover, countering Guts' next blow and applying an arm lock. When Guts refuses to surrender, Griffith is forced to dislocate his shoulder and wins the fight. He tells Guts that he now belongs to him, and Casca withdraws, feeling jealous that Griffith has never shown a similar personal interest in her or anyone else. Later, during the night, as Guts recovers from the dislocated shoulder in his tent, he hears the voices of Corcus and 6 other members of the Band of the Hawk just outside. They intend to kill him, so Guts positions his sword on his shoulder, trusting that he can win the impending confrontation. Casca intervenes and convinces the mercenaries that they cannot defeat Guts, despite his injury. After they leave, Guts finds Casca outside his tent, where she reveals to him that she only spent the 2 previous nights in the same bed as him because Griffith ordered her to, and she tells him that she no longer wants any relationship with him. Guts returns to his tent, where he cannot sleep and spends the night leaning against a log, clutching his sword for comfort. Guts has officially joined the Band of the Hawk, and it's time for his first mission since joining, a nighttime assault on an enemy camp. Their employers trust Griffith so much that they don't spend money on reinforcements, despite the band being outnumbered. Griffith puts Guts in charge of the rear guard, both as a skill test and a show of trust, as the rear guard is responsible for defending the back of a military force against enemy attacks, and there is a high risk of death for those tasked with its defense. Griffith takes Judo and a small group of soldiers to flank the castle, advancing along the nearby river, during which Judo displays his proficiency with throwing knives. Guts notices all the strategic advantages of flanking the castle and is impressed that Griffith has devised such an elaborate plan. Griffith gives the order to attack. The frontal and rear guard groups advance on the enemy, destroying their supplies and gunpowder. Knowing that the fire caused by the powder explosions will be carried by the wind toward the enemy's tents, Griffith orders the band to retreat. Guts, deeply impressed by the swiftness with which the entire operation is carried out, notices a large enemy cavalry group pursuing them and prepares for battle, determined to defend the Band of the Hawk. During the battle, Guts falls behind the Band of the Hawk, too busy fighting off the soldiers pursuing him. The enemies manage to wound Guts back, but he remains on his horse. Griffith and the main force of the band have returned to their base of operations, a fortress. He asks Corcus where Guts is, but Corcus, impressed by how effectively Guts is fighting, replies that he doesn't know. Guts' horse is killed, and the mercenaries have left him behind. He is saved by the timely arrival of Griffith, Judo, Pippin, and several others. Griffith helps Guts onto his horse, and they all head back to the fortress, with enemy soldiers close on their heels. When it seems that the enemy is about to catch up to them, the mercenaries burst into the forest, where the opposing forces are met with cannon fire and palisades. The enemy retreats, and the members of the band celebrate, except for Casca, who is unsure of what to think about the new association between Griffith and Guts. Later, at night, they celebrate their victory. 2 elderly men observe Griffith from inside the fortress and marvel at his inhuman effectiveness in leading troops into battle. The band members start to appreciate Guts, and Griffith notices him sitting atop the fortress battlements, gazing fixedly at the land beyond. Judo, Pippin, and a young band member named Rickard approach to invite Guts to drink with them. When he refuses, Pippin forcefully drags Guts, which angers the young man who dislikes being touched. Pippin drags Guts along to join the mercenaries in the celebration, where Guts finally decides to drink with them. Corcus watches with jealousy as they begin their celebration in honor of Guts, who notices Griffith giving him a smile from the crowd. Casca watches the whole scene alone from the top of the fortress battlements. The next morning after the celebration, Judo encounters Guts once again. He asks Guts what he thinks of the Band of the Hawk, and Guts reveals that he perceives the members to be different from other mercenary bands, as they are composed of much younger men who care more about each other than money. Then, Guts asks Judo what he thinks of Griffith, but Judo cannot give a direct answer, only saying that people are inexplicably drawn to Griffith and want to help him achieve his goals. Another member calls for Guts and tells him that Griffith wants to see him. Guts finds Griffith naked, pouring buckets of cold water over himself to sober up. They engage in a water fight instigated by Griffith, and when things calm down, Guts notices the strange pendant Griffith is wearing. Griffith informs him that the object is called the Beherit, or the Egg of the King, and its owner is destined to obtain the world in exchange for their own flesh and blood. Guts asks Griffith why he saved him the night before, and Griffith shares his dream of having his own kingdom, reminding Guts that he now belongs to him and that he will be the one to decide when Guts dies. Later, as Guts wonders how Griffith will achieve his dream, he is found by Rickard and Pippin, who congratulate him for being given command of 10 men. Casca once again watches Guts from the top of the fortress. Some time later, an 18-year-old Guts is seen in battle, still fighting alongside the Band of the Hawk. Later on, 2 enormous armies clash on a vast field. On one side are the forces of Midland, led by the King of Midland, and on the other are the armies of the rival Kingdom of Tudor. A regiment of Tudor soldiers, the Iron Lance Knights of the Black Sheep, proves to be particularly effective in defeating Midland's soldiers. After breaking through Midland's forces once again in a charge, they encounter a lone man sitting on his horse in the distance. The leader of the Black Sheep, believing the man to be a lowly Midland soldier trying to show bravery, forms a wedge formation and charges. However, the lone man turns out to be Guts, who unsheathes his sword and effortlessly pierces through the wedge, killing the leader and opening the way for the band of the Hawk to enter the battle. Once the band secures the area, Griffith exchanges a glance with Guts before returning to their fortress to celebrate. As Guts' men prepare to toast their victory, Casca interrupts and requests to see Guts alone. The mercenaries under Guts' command instinctively know that an encounter between the two always ends in an argument. Alone, Casca scolds Guts for not acting according to the plan, as he was supposed to be a decoy and not face the enemy alone. At first, Guts remains distant and remorseful during the scolding, but his anger flares up, and things reach a critical point when Casca accuses Guts of being nothing more than a rabid dog looking for a fight. The situation calms down with the sudden appearance of Griffith, who wishes to speak with Guts alone. Guts expresses to Griffith that he genuinely cares for the band, despite his questionable actions in the midst of battle. Later, as a reward for saving Midland's forces from Tudor's armies, the Band of the Hawk is officially recognized by the King of Midland, and Griffith, as the leader, receives the knighthood and the title of Viscount. After explaining to Corcus what this means for the band, Casca realizes that Guts is not present at the ceremony and finds him resting from his training in the courtyard of the band's headquarters. Casca recalls how once, Griffith explained to her what the Beherit, also known as the Emperor's Egg, was, an object that will soon make him a king. 3 years have passed since that conversation, and it still lingers fresh in the young woman's mind. Back in the present, atop a cliff, Griffith, Casca, and all their men watch as, in the distance, Guts leads his own men to assault a castle occupied by Tudor's forces. Judo informs those around him that it is said a legendary swordsman and fearsome warrior known as Zodd is allied with Tudor. The legends about Zodd are centuries old, hence his nickname, Nosferatu, and the notion that he is immortal. Everyone feels the same sense of unease upon hearing the news. Inside the castle, Guts is eager to enter a tower where he sent 50 men who have not returned, presumably killed by a lone warrior inside. Despite Gaston's suggestion, Guts' second in command, Guts refuses to request reinforcements from Griffith. Suddenly, a lone band member emerges from the tower, with the right side of his body horribly mutilated. He utters the name, Nosferatu Zodd, before dying, confirming the earlier rumors. Ordering his men to wait outside, Guts enters the tower alone. As Guts wanders through the tower, he sees that the bodies of his soldiers have been completely torn apart, despite wearing armor. As he ventures further, he encounters Zodd, a huge, naked man with animalistic features wielding only an enormous saber-like sword. Guts launches an attack but is easily repelled by the larger and stronger Zodd, who seems almost inhuman. Zodd advances toward Guts, praising the raid captain's sword skills, which have been further honed during Guts' 3 years in the Band of the Hawk. Guts manages to block blows strong enough to destroy nearby pillars, but Zodd maintains the advantage. Knowing he stands no chance in a one-on-one fight, Guts prepares to strike Zodd with a single full-powered blow, to which Zodd intends to respond in the same manner. Both men unleash their attacks, and Guts cleanly cuts through the upper half of Zodd's sword, but the warrior is cunning enough to block the follow-up move with his bare arms. Zodd praises Guts again, this time for being the first person to cut him so deeply. Although the blow would be strong enough to kill any normal man, Zodd simply grabs the blade with his own hands, pulls it out of his wounds, and begins his transformation into a huge, lion-like humanoid creature. The monster that Zodd has transformed into attacks Guts with his bare hands, but Guts is caught off guard and doesn't realize the blow until it's too late. The strike hits, sending Guts straight through a nearby pillar. Regaining consciousness, Guts moves with all his strength to avoid Zodd's attacks, while the monster demands that he fight back. Finding an opportunity, Guts attacks, but it's in vain. Guts' sword barely manages to scratch Zodd's horns. Zodd attacks again, and Guts is thrown against another pillar. Exhausted and injured, Guts can no longer move, and Zodd expresses his disappointment with the short fight but praises the young warrior one last time for his tenacity and skill. Before Zodd can deliver the killing blow, a rain of arrows pierces his back. Griffith has arrived with the Band of the Hawk, determined to save Guts. They fire a second volley, but the arrows have no effect, while a furious Zodd proceeds to massacre his new opponents for getting in the way of his battle. While the monster is distracted, Griffith seizes the opportunity to find Guts and help him escape, while the latter is angry at himself for needing to be saved by Griffith. But Zodd stands in their way just as they were about to retreat, with no intention of letting them leave the chamber alive. Guts and Griffith quickly maneuver around the giant Zodd, who doesn't know whom to attack first. As a result, Griffith manages to cut off his arm. Angry, Zodd strikes Griffith with his tail, and the impact knocks him unconscious. Then, Zodd strikes Guts with his own severed arm before reattaching it to his stump, where it reattaches with a burst of steam. Zodd moves toward Griffith, still unconscious, with the intention of killing him first, regretting that he has found another who can truly harm him. But Zodd abruptly stops upon noticing the crimson Beherit around Griffith's neck. The surprise of seeing it causes a wave of fear in Zodd, which then turns into amusement as he realizes that this is part of his design. Zodd pierces through the fortress roof as he unfurls bat-like wings and gives Guts a prophecy. If he truly is a friend of Griffith, then he will inevitably die once Griffith's dream crumbles. Zodd then flies away through the opening he created, while Guts ponders the demon's words before heading toward Griffith, who is being attended to by Casca. She tells Guts to stay away, blaming him for Griffith's injuries. In the castle of Wyndham, two nobles summarize the events that occurred in the castle and are impressed by Griffith's feat, convinced that it's only a matter of time before the warrior becomes a land-owning noble. The nobles, skeptical of the Band of the Hawks' claim that a monster appeared on the battlefield, encounter Guts, who walks with a crutch. They confront Guts sarcastically, asking if the monster caused his injuries or if they simply mistook a dog for a monster, causing Guts to press his crutch into one of the noble's foot, and when the other moves to attack, Guts pacifies him with a stern look. Guts finds Casca, Judo, Pippin, Corcus, and Rickard outside one of the castle towers, within which Griffith is recovering from the wounds inflicted by Zodd. Guts and Casca, still upset from the argument they had immediately after Zodd's escape when she blamed our hero for Griffith's injuries, are not speaking to each other, although Judo assures Guts that her anger stemmed from her concern for Griffith and not from any hatred toward Guts. Guts' attempts to enter the tower are stopped by the band members, who inform him that Griffith is being visited by important nobles and religious officials and should not be disturbed. When Guts asks his comrades who they are, they respond that they are nobles, friends, and enemies taking advantage of the moment to be with the man of the hour. Despite being forbidden to approach their leader, as it would embarrass Griffith in front of all the nobles, Guts continues to try to enter, only to be stopped by two guards whom he easily neutralizes despite his injuries. On his third attempt to enter, he is personally stopped by Casca, who punches him in the face. She angrily asks him why he's so stubborn and wonders to herself what it is that their leader sees in him. Seeing Casca crying, Guts walks away from the tower, too angry to stay in the band's company. Driven by his frustration from the altercation with Casca, Guts trains on one of the castle's terraces, where he is found by Griffith, also using a crutch. Griffith tells him that he heard that Guts and the rest of the group visited him while he was recovering and apologizes for not attending to them, acknowledging that while he doesn't enjoy the company of nobles, they are a necessary evil. The two warriors converse, prompted by Griffith, about the mysteries of the world, mainly the existence of gods and demons. When Griffith asks what made Zodd flee, Guts honestly responds that it was the sight of the Beherit. Mentioning the object, Guts recalls the monster's warnings that his friend will eventually betray him but says nothing, while Griffith assures him that it was fortunate for a gypsy to give him the object. Then, Guts asks Griffith why he personally came to save him, recalling the similar experience 3 years ago when Guts was positioned as a rearguard and Griffith came to rescue him. Griffith responds that he can't think of a direct answer and tells Guts that sometimes there doesn't need to be a reason to rescue someone. The conversation between Guts and Griffith is interrupted by the appearance of the King of Midland and his brother, Julius, second in line to the Midland throne. Griffith bows respectfully in the presence of the king, although it takes persuasion from Griffith and threats from Julius for Guts to do the same. The king has decided to speak with Griffith based on the idea that it's young entrepreneurs like him who will help Midland prevail in the war against Tudor and contribute to Midland's growing legacy instead of the established nobles. While Griffith thanks the king for his compliments, he notices a girl watching him from behind one of the castle columns, a few meters away. The king introduces her as his daughter, Princess Charlotte. As she approaches the group of men, she trips on a stone in the pavement but is saved from falling by Griffith, who catches her. Griffith is reprimanded by Julius for touching Charlotte, and he slaps Griffith contemptuously, but Griffith gracefully accepts the punishment, showing Julius a disconcerting smile. The king, Julius, and their accompanying guards leave, but Charlotte and Griffith exchange a quick glance before she departs with them, showing mutual interest. Witnessing this exchange of glances, Guts smiles. Julius walks through the city and overhears a group of women talking about Griffith, excited about the fact that he is going to be promoted in rank, proving that he is a top-notch match for any woman who wants to marry him. Julius scolds the group of maidens for gossiping about Griffith. After they run off, Julius is greeted by Minister Foss, who informs Julius that the royal guard for the upcoming autumn hunt will be composed of members of the Band of the Hawk, rather than Julius's own White Dragon Knights, as is customary. This affects him badly, as it shows that his knights' influence, and his own, are waning, and that the king would be favoring Griffith over him. When Foss mocks Julius, saying that at this rate Griffith will become one of the kingdom's great generals, Julius shouts at him that he won't allow a commoner to rise to that position. The paranoia this causes in Julius allows Foss to plant a sinister idea in his mind, to assassinate Griffith with a lost, poisoned arrow during the hunt. As Julius leaves, confident in this new plan, Foss remains behind, smiling with knowledge. At night, Guts lies on the roof of one of Wyndham's many towers, pointing his broadsword at the stars. He remembers Griffith's question about why he would ever need a reason to save Guts and vows to wield his sword for Griffith's sake. The autumn hunt has begun, and the nobles enjoy hunting foxes under the king's supervision and the protection of the Band of the Hawk. Some nobles ask the king why he's not participating in the hunt, and he responds that it's an activity for more experienced hunters than him, so he prefers to observe rather than interfere. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to anyone, Julius has conspired with a crossbowman to assassinate Griffith. Guts feels aversion to the whole event, as he doesn't enjoy being part of the nobles' amusement and considers it a waste of time, preferring to be on the battlefield, although Judo and Corcus remind him that it's a great honor for the band to have been chosen as the royal guard. Casca, who is observing the conversation, directs her attention towards Griffith, who is talking to Princess Charlotte. Charlotte expresses her disdain for the hunt and, by extension, the war, considering it nothing more than men satisfying an innate desire for cruelty. Griffith doesn't respond but plucks a leaf from a nearby tree and uses it to whistle. He then quickly teaches Charlotte the technique when she tries and fails, and they enjoy each other's company. Some knights make a boar emerge from the dense undergrowth behind Charlotte's horse, which gets scared and runs off, taking Charlotte with him. Griffith pursues them and manages to calm Charlotte's horse in a nearby ravine, away from the hunting party. Terrified, Charlotte clings to Griffith, but their moment is interrupted when she becomes aware of her own actions and quickly straightens up on her horse. As Griffith prepares to take the horse back to the main group, a crossbow bolt pierces his armor and embeds itself in his chest. Griffith collapses in the shallow ravine, and the Band of the Hawk rushes to him. While Casca tends to Griffith, Guts interrogates Charlotte. When she can't answer his questions, a frustrated Guts searches the surrounding thick forest but doesn't see Julius's assassin hiding behind a tree. Everyone's attention turns back to Griffith, who, despite being shot in the chest, remains quite calm and tells everyone to remain calm. He removes the arrow and discovers that it's coated in poison. Griffith reveals that his heart was protected by his Beherit, and therefore he is completely unharmed. The band members marvel at Griffith's incredible luck, but Guts suspects that something more than luck is responsible for Griffith's survival. Casca tells their leader to remove his armor since the arrow was poisoned, and it could still be on his clothes, so even a slight scratch could kill him, but Griffith assures her that he's fine. Charlotte, dismounted from her horse, apologizes to Griffith for leading him to the secluded ravine. The band members suddenly realize that Charlotte could have been the target of the attacker, and Guts leads a group of men to search the forest, but the crossbowman has already left the area. Meanwhile, Griffith has seen Julius and intuitively deduces the identity of his would-be assassin. Back in Wyndham, Julius and the crossbowman discuss their failed plan in Julius's hall. The prevailing theory among the nobles regarding the attack is that an assassin from Tudor was sent to kill Charlotte, and Griffith protected her with his own body. Julius, furious that his plan backfired and increased Griffith's status among Midland's aristocracy, orders his accomplice to leave. Julius recalls the moment when he and Griffith locked eyes on the hunting grounds, comparing Griffith's gaze to that of a hawk stalking its prey. Elsewhere in Wyndham, Guts responds to Griffith's call. He finds him in a study at the top of a tower, where Griffith states that winning battles alone won't give him enough status to have his own kingdom. As Griffith writes and seals a letter, he proposes that he and Guts devise their own assassination plan. Guts, armed and cloaked, stands outside Julius's mansion at night. In a flashback from their conversation in the study, Griffith tells Guts how he deduced that Julius is his would-be assassin. The poison on the crossbow bolt is highly lethal and only one doctor in Wyndham handles it. The crossbowman, a member of the White Dragon Knights led by Julius, entered the doctor's tent to obtain it. Griffith bribed one of the castle maids to follow the crossbowman, and she saw him leaving Julius's hall after their discussion about the failed assassination attempt. The flashback ends. Back in the present, under orders not to be seen and not to reveal the plan to anyone, Guts infiltrates Julius's massive residence. From his position on the rooftop, he notices Julius training his young son Adonis in swordsmanship, supervised by Hassan, Adonis' caretaker. Guts pauses for a moment to observe how the boy is defeated by his father, who then walks away after making him drop the sword. Adonis' harsh training reminds Guts of his own upbringing under Gambino. Julius drinks wine by a fireplace after the training session. Looking into the flames, he sees a vision of Griffith and, enraged, smashes his goblet. A gust of wind alerts him to the balcony door now being open, and from the shadows created by the fire, Guts appears. Julius tries to reach one of the swords on the ornamental armor, but it's too late. Guts lunges forward and slashes Julius across the chest, killing him. Guts notices a figure standing in a doorway and, following Griffith's instructions, impales his sword into it. As it's pushed into the light of the adjacent hallway, Guts is surprised to see that the figure wasn't a guard, not even an adult. Guts has stabbed Adonis in the stomach. Adonis collapses and reaches out his hand, and Guts grabs it. The boy's attempts to speak are hindered by the blood coming out of his mouth. Slowly, Adonis dies, and his hand slips from Guts. When Guts realizes that he has just killed a child, he is spotted by two guards whom he quickly kills. Immediately, he starts to escape. Hassan has been alerted to the intruder and, upon discovering what has happened to Julius and Adonis, finds them dead. The supposed thief, Guts, has managed to make it outside, but he has to fight off an indeterminate number of guards who see him and attack. Unable to kill them all without risking being identified, Guts leaps over the mansion's perimeter wall, but before he can make it, a crossbow bolt pierces his shoulder. Landing on the other side of the wall, Guts notices a small barred window at its base, and after kicking out the bars, he jumps through the hole and falls into a sewer. Upon landing clumsily, Guts' head hits a solid stone, and he loses consciousness. Guts dreams of his younger self fighting against Gambino. As their swords clash, Guts tries to tell Gambino that he only wanted his appreciation. Their fight is interrupted by the silhouette of the monstrous form of Zodd, who beheads Gambino and stabs young Guts in the abdomen. Zodd raises his hand to his face, but the light reveals that it's not a monstrous Zodd but a monstrous Guts, reflecting Guts' accidental killing of Adonis. Guts abruptly wakes up, and the injury to his skull causes him to vomit and bleed profusely from his head. Slowly, he moves to find the way out of the sewer. In a tavern in Wyndham, Casca, Corcus, Judo, Rickert, and Pippin are having drinks. Judo mentions that he hasn't seen Guts all day, and they suspect that Guts is training on his own. As if on cue, the tavern door opens, and Guts enters, dirty, bloody, and seemingly on the verge of passing out. The mercenaries rush to him, and he asks Casca where Griffith is, to which she responds that he's attending a party organized by Charlotte. As Guts prepares to leave, Casca notices the arrow wound on Guts' arm. The grand banquet hall where Griffith is located is at the top of a long staircase. As Guts ascends it, he looks up and can see, thanks to the lights emanating from the place, Griffith and Charlotte sharing a moment alone by the grand fountain at the top of the stairs. Griffith and Charlotte have left the hustle and bustle of the party to share a moment alone outside. He offers her a seat on his cape at the edge of a fountain, which she accepts. Guts makes his way up the staircase but is stopped by Casca, who refuses to allow Guts to embarrass Griffith by interrupting his conversation with Charlotte while covered in sewage and blood. She takes Guts' dagger from its sheath and uses it to cut a piece of cloth from her sleeve, which she uses to bandage Guts' arrow wound. Charlotte tells Griffith that the party was her father's idea as a way to distract from the long-standing war between Midland and Tudor. Griffith recalls the conversation he and Charlotte had during the autumn hunt about the brutality of men and their need for war. He posits that they are not satisfying a desire to cause harm but preserving their own dreams. Griffith goes on to say that every man should have a dream they wish to fulfill and that he cannot tolerate people who simply exist without purpose, an idea that deeply affects Guts. Griffith apologizes to Charlotte for digressing, but she is as captivated by Griffith's words as Guts. She admits that when she first saw Griffith, she thought he was of noble birth and couldn't believe he was a commoner. She's amazed that Griffith displays all the magnificence of a noble but is as down-to-earth as a common peasant. She wonders aloud if it's this aspect of him that seems to attract all his friends. From a distance, Casca clenches her fist. Griffith delves into another monologue. Griffith reveals his philosophies on friendship. He recognizes the members of his band as excellent soldiers and comrades dedicated to the dream he envisions, but for Griffith, a friend is something more. His friend, Griffith says, is his equal, someone who would never depend on another's dream, who has their own reason to be alive and would oppose those who trample upon that dream, including Griffith himself. These words strike a chord with Guts. Casca notices Guts' reaction to Griffith's speech. As Griffith and Charlotte gaze into each other's eyes, Casca looks away. Griffith and Charlotte's conversation is interrupted by a maid who comes to inform Charlotte of the death of her uncle, Julius. The two women, in a panic, speak unknowingly of Griffith's machinations leading to Julius's death. The White Hawk smiles. Guts, still unnoticed by Griffith, turns around and leaves, leaving Casca alone and bewildered on the steps of the banquet hall as she looks at Guts' bandaged wound. As the time for a crucial battle in the 100-Year War approaches, Griffith prepares to depart for the battlefield. On his way, he is greeted by Minister Foss, who mentions the deaths of Julius and Adonis, claiming they were the work of a demon. Griffith responds that it was the work of a man. Foss informs Griffith that a new theory has emerged about his own near loss of life during the hunting session, a theory claiming that the arrow wasn't aimed at Charlotte but at Griffith himself, and that the assassin may not be of Tudor origin but a subordinate of someone within Wyndham's court. Griffith feigns surprise at this new rumor, dismissing it as audacious. Griffith leaves, and Foss thinks to himself, revealing that the purpose of the conversation was to make Griffith slip up and let on that he was responsible for the deaths of Julius and Adonis, but the ploy was unsuccessful. Foss considers that there are many others besides Julius who hold contempt for Griffith, and he may pit them against him. As he prepares to leave, Foss looks down the hallway where, from the shadows, Griffith briefly gazes at him before departing. In Wyndham's main hall, Casca notices Griffith descending the staircase. Before she can get his attention, however, Charlotte is approached by her stepmother, the Queen of Midland, who scolds her for offering gifts to a commoner like Griffith. Charlotte retreats further into the castle, disheartened. As Griffith orders the Band of the Hawk to mobilize, Guts reflects on Griffith's definition of a true friend. He lowers his visor, ready for battle, but remains downcast. Under a dark sky, with occasional flashes of lightning, the band of the Hawk faces off against the enemy tutor forces. During the calm, both metaphorical and literal before the storm, Casca quietly complains of abdominal pain, although when Judo asks about her condition, she quickly assures him that it's nothing. Griffith commands the attack, and the mercenaries clash with the tutor soldiers in a tremendous battle. The armies seem evenly matched, although the talented band of the Hawk struggles to defeat the tutor soldiers, with one exception. Casca, still suffering from her abdominal pains, kills her formidable opponent with some effort before a titanic man in intimidating armor, Adon, stands before her. Casca's reputation as the only woman in Griffith's band, commanding hundreds of men, has spread to tutor, and he wonders aloud if her position was a result of sneaking into Griffith's chamber. His words infuriate her greatly, and she attacks recklessly. Adon easily blocks her sword strike and hits her head with his trident, knocking her off her horse. He confronts her in combat, but the blow to the head and her abdominal issues result in a lack of resistance, and she can barely put up a fight. Adon offers her a chance at life, to go with him as his prisoner, becoming a courtesan for his army, or his next strike will be the decisive blow. Casca refuses and accepts her fate as Adon lowers his trident. But just in time, Guts arrives and asks why Casca is acting differently from her usual behavior. Guts easily knocks down Adon with his sword, and they prepare to intensely face each other. Impressed by Guts' ability to block his attack, Adon prepares for his ultimate technique, but during the charging period, Guts brings his sword down on Adon's helmet, cutting the right side of his face in one strike. Adon survives the attack but is too injured and frightened to continue fighting. The soldiers can't believe their leader's skill and celebrate the victory. Guts asks why Casca's abilities have suddenly diminished, but she, too tired to respond, faints. As she teeters on the edge of a cliff, Guts leans from his horse to catch her, but he is struck in the side by an arrow shot by Adon. The combination of Casca's weight and the wound in his stomach causes them to fall together off the cliff into a deep ravine, horrifying the rest of the members of the band of the Hawk. As the battle continues above them, Guts manages to pull Casca out of the water and onto solid ground, learning the lesson never to swim with armor on. It has started to rain. Guts leans over Casca, and upon not hearing her breathing, revives her, and she successfully coughs up the water. Suddenly, remembering the crossbow bolt in his side, Guts grabs it and pulls it out of his body. Our hero wants to return to the battlefield but knows it's impossible due to his and Casca's health conditions, so he decides to take refuge in a nearby cave. The battle has ended at the top of the cliff. Judo and Gaston, who witnessed Guts and Casca's fall, report the incident to Griffith. Judo and Gaston ask Griffith to send a search party below the cliff to look for their missing unit commanders, but two more members argue that they can't afford to send a search party due to the lack of soldiers and claim that two warriors of Guts and Casca's caliber can find their own way back. The warrior mocks the two, saying they should never have allowed themselves to be thrown off the cliff and that if they can't make it back on their own, they deserve to be dead. Griffith remains undecided about what action to take. Guts has dragged Casca to the cave, where he tends to her arrow wound. Although both are freezing cold, Guts can't risk starting a fire for fear of being discovered by enemy soldiers. He notices Casca shivering in her sleep and, finding no other alternative, undresses her to remove her wet and cold clothes. After removing her pants, Guts notices blood on his hand. Initially thinking it came from a wound, he quickly realizes that Casca's blood, stomach pains, and fever are due to the fact that she is a woman. Silently, Guts wonders how difficult it must be to live as a woman. Cradling Casca against his chest to keep her warm and with his sword in his arm for protection, Guts prepares to spend the night waiting. And that's how the first part of this manhwa ends. If you've reached this part of the video, let me tell you that you've been one of the few people to make it here, so comment the word monster in the comments. Remember to subscribe to not miss any videos. With that said, see you in the next video.